Everyone in Deadstone Ridge had heard whispers about the stranger who'd crawled out of the desert 3 nights before, but nobody knew the truth. Not about the blood on his coat, not about the ghost he carried in his eyes, and definitely not about the girl he found dying at the edge of his land. That truth began on a night when the wind sounded like it was dragging chains across the sand, when nothing moved except the darkness itself, and when Eli Mercer, a rancher who'd already buried his whole world, stepped outside to see whether the desert was finally coming to take what little he had left. The sky was a bruised purple, the moon a thin cold blade, and the land so starved for water that even the shadows looked thirsty. Eli moved slowly across his dead yard, boots grinding over cracked dirt, his lantern flickering against the skeletal remains of the corral he'd once built with his son. His horse snorted weakly behind him, ribs showing through hide that used to shine, and the single barrel of water beside the porch felt heavier than a lifetime of grief. He was reaching for the lid when he heard it. A noise so soft, he almost thought it came from inside his head. A short, broken gasp that didn't belong to any creature he knew. Eli froze, hand drifting toward the revolver at his hip, every muscle tightening as he scanned the darkness beyond the fence line. Out here, a strange sound could mean a dying cow, a lost traveler, or trouble wearing feathers and scars. He raised his lantern and stepped forward. The light spilled across the ground in a trembling circle, revealing nothing but dust at first. Then he saw movement. Something small, hunched, barely breathing. As he approached, the shape sharpened into a figure. A girl, no older than 15, Apache. Her skin was scorched by the sun, her braids tangled with dirt, her lips split like bark from thirst. She had a knife wound across her abdomen, wrapped in a strip of hide soaked with half-dried blood. Her eyes flashed open when he got close, dark and fierce, despite the weakness in her limbs, and her hand twitched toward the water barrel as if drawn by instinct alone. Eli's jaw tightened. Every warning he'd ever heard about Apaches rushed through his head. Raids, ambushes, graves dug too small for the children who never grew older. The memory of his own little girl, Anna, flashed like lightning. Pale face, fevered breathing, the promise he whispered to her as she faded. "Daddy's here. Daddy won't let you be alone." He felt the weight of the past clawing at him as he pointed the lantern at the girl, watching the way her chest barely rose. She whispered something in Apache, voice thin as smoke. He didn't understand the words, but he understood the way she looked at that water, not with want, but with desperation. Eli swallowed hard. One drink could cost him his livestock. Another could cost him his life if her people were nearby. But letting her die felt like letting Anna die all over again. So he made a choice he knew might ruin him. He dipped the ladle into the barrel, his last real water, and knelt beside her, lifting it to her mouth. For a second, she stared at him, disbelieving, then drank with a hunger so raw it made his throat tighten. Water dripped down her chin, mixing with dust, turning it to muddy streaks across her skin. When she finished, she let out a trembling breath. "Why?" she whispered in broken English. Eli didn't have an answer he could say out loud. Instead, he cleaned her wound with the last of his whiskey, tearing strips from his own shirt to bandage her. She didn't cry out once, only clenched her jaw and stared at him with something like confusion. When she could finally speak again, she whispered her name, Alohi, and warned him in a trembling voice, "My people come. They think white men hurt me. You must go." Eli shook his head. "Not leaving my land," he said, though fear stirred deep inside him. He carried her to the old storage shed where the walls still held, laid her on a bed of straw, and covered her with his coat. She tried to argue, but exhaustion stole her voice, pulling her into sleep before she could finish. Eli stepped outside, breath shaking as he looked toward the northern ridge. The night was silent. Too silent. Then he saw it. Tiny sparks of orange moving along the ridge, flickering like eyes in the dark. Torches. Dozens of them. Apache riders lining the horizon. Eli felt the blood drain from his face, and farther south, almost hidden against the desert floor, he noticed another dust cloud rising. Another group of riders. Unknown. Unwelcome. Two forces barreling toward Deadstone Ridge, and Eli Mercer, standing with an empty well and a wounded Apache girl, realized the night was only the beginning of a storm that could tear the whole region apart. By sunrise, the desert felt like a throat scraped raw by heat, a place where only buzzards and stubborn fools survived, and Eli Mercer knew he was one of the latter as he saddled his exhausted horse and rode toward Deadstone Ridge's town center, dust trailing behind him like smoke from a dying fire. His shirt was still stiff with dried blood from bandaging alohi, though it carried more truth than he wanted anyone to notice. The girl was hidden in his shed under an old army blanket, a canteen beside her filled with the last inches of water he dared to give. She slept fitfully, whispering words in Apache that made his bones ache with a guilt he couldn't name. Deadstone Ridge looked even worse than usual. Windows shuttered, wagons half abandoned, the air heavy with the fear of people who had learned long ago that hope was a luxury the desert didn't tolerate. When Eli rode into the center of town, Sheriff Ward Kessler stood outside the jailhouse, broad-shouldered and worn down by years spent holding this place together with grit and a rifle. His gray mustache twitched when he saw Eli, and he stepped forward with that slow, deliberate walk of a man who'd buried too many friends to waste movement. "Morning, Mercer," Ward said, eyes narrowing. "You see the smoke north of your place?" Eli nodded grimly. "Not smoke. Torches. Apache riders. Too many to count cleanly." The townsfolk gathering around them murmured like bees stirred from a hive. Marla Tyson, owner of the saloon, crossed her arms tight over her apron. "I told y'all this drought was bringing death with it. You can smell it in the dirt." Eli dismounted, his legs trembling beneath him. "There's more," he said. "A second group riding from the south, kicking up a dark cloud. Don't know who they are, but they're moving fast." Ward's expression hardened like cooling iron. "We're boxed in." The mayor, a nervous man named Fletcher, who sweated even in winter, pushed forward. "We don't have enough water to last a week. If either group takes the wells, we're done. Dead. All of us." Someone in the crowd shouted, "Then we should strike first." That someone was Harris Clay, tall, young, stupid in the way men become when pride outruns sense. He shoved his way to the front. "Why wait? Ride out, hit them before they hit us. Show them Deadstone Ridge ain't lying down." Ward's voice cut him in half. "You think 30 riders on either side are going to be shocked to see a handful of farmers charging across open desert? We'd be bones before sundown." Eli's stomach twisted. The weight of all their eyes settled on him when Fletcher gestured at the blood on his clothes. "Where'd that come from, Eli?" Eli hesitated, feeling the truth clawing up his throat. If he told them about Alohi, about giving her water, the town would tear him apart, call him traitor, call him fool, maybe both. But lying felt like dragging his dead daughter's memory through mud. He forced himself to speak. "Found a girl on my land, Apache, hurt bad, thirsty." The crowd's reaction cracked the air open, gasps, curses, the sharp intake of panic. Harris Clay pointed at him like a man trying to purge his fear by choosing a target. "You gave her water?" She was dying, Eli said quietly. Didn't feel right to let her. Didn't feel right? Harris spat. You just told the Apache we've still got water to steal. They'll come straight for you, and for us. Ward Kessler stepped between them, palm raised. Enough! Eli, where's the girl now? Eli felt heat flood his spine. One wrong word, and Alohi would be dragged out, shot, or used as a bargaining chip. She's gone, he lied. I gave her water and she crawled north. Didn't follow her. Ward studied his face for a long moment, unreadable, then nodded slowly. All right, folks, you know what to do. Preparations began at once. Boards nailed across windows, rifles handed out, water rationed so tightly it felt like sin to swallow. Ward placed lookouts on rooftops and on the church bell tower, telling them to shoot only if shot at first. As the hours passed, the sun climbed higher, unforgiving and pitiless. Eli slipped away from town as soon as he could without raising suspicion, riding hard back to his ranch. The desert felt too quiet, too watchful, like it was holding its breath. Alohi was awake when he stepped into the shed, sitting up despite the pain etched across her face. They know? She asked. They suspect, Eli said. They don't know you're here. Her gaze darkened with worry. My people think someone take me, think someone hurt me. They come angry. They come ready to spill blood. Can you stop them? He asked. Alohi winced. If I live. Eli helped her drink the last sip from the canteen. Outside, wind rattled the broken shutters like fingers trying to get in. Then he heard something faint. So faint, he thought it was his imagination at first. Drumming. Slow. Steady. Rhythmic. Not a celebration. A summons. Alohi's face tightened. They come now. Eli stepped outside, heart thundering like it was trying to beat its way out of his chest. He looked north, toward the ridge, and saw the Apache riders more clearly now. Shapes on horseback, moving in a controlled formation. Torches still burning despite the rising heat. But something else stole his breath more violently. To the south, the second dust cloud was closer, much closer. He could see silhouettes now, not Apache, not townsfolk. Armed riders wearing long coats and broad hats. Outlaws, wolves drawn by the scent of a town on the brink of collapse. Two storms, one fueled by vengeance, one fueled by greed. And Deadstone Ridge stood directly between them. Alohi spoke weakly behind him. Your people, they not ready. Nobody's ready for this, Eli said. He forced himself to breathe as he watched both forces creeping closer, the desert shrinking around them like a tightening noose. The day was rising, and with it came the promise that before sundown, the whole region might drown in blood instead of the water they all prayed for. Eli Mercer touched the revolver at his hip, feeling the weight of a decision that might save a town or break it beyond repair. Dawn broke like a blade slashing the horizon, spilling harsh red light across the desert and revealing the full shape of the danger closing in around Deadstone Ridge. And Eli Mercer felt his ribs tighten as he stood on the porch of his dying ranch with the sun rising behind him like a warning fire. The Apache riders had descended from the northern ridge and now formed a wide, deliberate circle around the outskirts of town, their horses moving with eerie discipline as they closed the noose. They didn't shout, didn't charge, didn't reveal a drop of emotion, just watched, waiting for the moment to strike or negotiate or avenge a crime still unknown to the people trembling inside the town's wooden buildings. Sheriff Ward Kessler stood in the middle of the street like a man welded to the dirt, hat pushed back, rifle resting at his side, eyes scanning each movement with the cold calculation of a veteran who'd outlived his own fear. On the rooftops, men and boys crouched behind chimneys and barrels, hands shaking on rifle stocks, slick with sweat. Women peered from behind curtains, holding their children close, whispering prayers no one remembered teaching them. Eli rode in slow from the east, heart pounding as he passed boarded windows and faces pale with dread. Ward turned slightly, not taking his eyes off the Apache line. "Morning," he muttered. "Hell of a day for a showdown." Eli swallowed hard, trying to force down the guilt swelling in his gut. "They're not attacking," he said. "Not yet." Ward grunted. "Yeah, that's the problem." Before either man could speak again, a single Apache rider broke from the formation and rode forward. A tall, broad man with long braids streaked with gray, bare chest painted with symbols Eli had seen only in stories whispered around campfires. There was no mistaking him. Tasunke, Alohi's father, a chief whose name rode ahead of him like thunder. He stopped just beyond rifle range, raised one hand, and spoke in a deep voice that rolled across the dirt street like distant storm water. The old Army scout Reardon, recruited by Ward for his slim understanding of Apache, translated under his breath. "He says they come for blood taken from their people. He says a child was harmed. He says the town must answer." The crowd stirred like a nest kicked by a boot. Someone shouted, "We never touch their kids." Someone else yelled, "Lies! They're trying to scare us." Ward stepped forward and called out, "We don't want to fight." Tasunke's voice returned, sharper, angrier. Reardon paled. "He says if the one responsible doesn't step forward, the whole town pays." Eli felt the world squeeze around him until he could barely breathe. He wasn't responsible for her injury, but he had taken Alohi, hid her, gave her water, and lied about it. He knew what he had to do. Before his courage could rot into fear, Eli walked past Ward, ignoring the sheriff's alarmed shout. He rode slowly toward Tasunke, hands up, rifle slung behind him. Every Apache rider's bowstring tightened, following his movement like a pack following prey. Eli stopped 10 paces from the chief and dismounted, his boots sinking into the hot sand. "I'm the one you're looking for," he said, voice steady despite the tremor in his chest. Reardon translated quickly. Tasunke glared down from his horse, eyes like burning coals. He said something short and sharp. "He asks what you did to his daughter," Reardon whispered. Eli swallowed. "I found her injured, on my land. She was dying. I gave her water, patched her up. She's alive." Murmurs rippled through the Apache line. Tasunke's jaw clenched, disbelief flickering in his gaze. He barked another question. Reardon hesitated. "He says if you lie, he'll burn your soul from this earth." Eli met Tasunke's eyes. "Then come see for yourself." Behind him, Ward shouted, "Eli, don't you dare bring them into town." But the decision was already made. Tasunke nudged his horse forward, signaling 5 riders to accompany him. Eli mounted up and led them east across the cracked terrain toward his ranch. The ride felt longer than any trail he'd ever taken, every hoofbeat echoing like a heartbeat before a verdict. When they reached the shed, Eli's mouth was dry as sand. He pushed open the door, fearing everything. Alohi lay where he'd left her, but her eyes fluttered open, warm with relief the moment she saw her father. "Ata," she whispered, tears filling her eyes. Tasunke fell to his knees beside her, hands trembling as he touched her face, her shoulder, the bandages Eli had wrapped around her wound. Alohi spoke softly in Apache, her voice cracking at the edges, pointing toward Eli. Tasunke listened, nodded slowly, then rose to his full height. When he stepped toward Eli, Every Apache rider tensed. Eli braced for a knife, a blow, a death sentence. Instead, Tasunki placed a heavy hand on Eli's shoulder, his expression fierce yet grateful. He spoke one single word. Reardon cleared his throat. He says, "Honored." Before Eli could respond, a gunshot cracked through the still morning air. Tasunke whirled. Another shot followed, then screaming in the distance, terrified, ragged screaming. Eli's pulse spiked. The sound came from town. A black column of smoke rose behind Deadstone Ridge. The other riders, the outlaws. They had waited for the standoff, slipped in from the south while both sides watched each other. Now they were attacking the town like wolves tearing into wounded prey. Tasunka's eyes blazed. Alohi grabbed her father's arm and pointed toward the smoke, pleading urgently. Reardon translated, voice trembling. "She says you saved her. She asks her father to save your people." Something shifted between Apache and rancher, something heavier than words. Tasunki snapped out a command, and his riders wheeled their horses instantly, forming a spear point aimed back toward Deadstone Ridge. Eli mounted fast, breath burning, and followed as the Apache warriors thundered across the desert toward the chaos unfolding in town. When they crested the final rise, the sight hit them like a hammer. Outlaws in dust coats rampaging through the main street, dragging supplies from buildings, firing into the church steeple, tying townsfolk up like cattle. Deadstone Ridge was bleeding, and for the first time in its history, salvation and vengeance were riding in together. The moment the Apache riders swept over the ridge and charged toward Deadstone Ridge, the entire town seemed to jolt awake as if struck by lightning, and Eli Mercer felt his heart slam against his ribs as he rode beside Tasunke, dust exploding beneath their horses' hooves while the rising sun cast long, stabbing shadows across the ground. The outlaws had already carved chaos into the streets, windows shattered, flames creeping along the saloon roof, townsfolk cowering behind barrels or dragged into the open by rough hands. A man in a long black coat, clearly the leader, stood in the middle of it all, barking orders with a cold grin while his men kicked down doors and grabbed sacks of grain, rifles, and anything else that looked valuable. Eli saw Sheriff Ward pinned down behind the water tower, firing when he could, ducking when he had to, his face streaked with sweat and grit. Ward shouted something Eli couldn't hear over the roar of hooves, but the message was clear enough. If help didn't break through now, Deadstone Ridge would fall before noon. Tasunki let out a fierce cry, half command, half battle oath, and his warriors surged forward like a tidal wave of horseflesh and steel. Arrows whistled through the air, striking rifles out of outlaw hands, piercing hats, knocking men sprawling into the dirt. Eli felt the ground tremble as he fired from the saddle, taking down a bandit who'd been aiming at Marla Tyson's saloon door. The man spun and fell, kicking up dust as he hit the street. Ward rose from behind the water tower, firing twice in support, and for a heartbeat, the town seemed stunned by the sight of Apaches and settlers fighting side by side. Confusion pulsed through the outlaw ranks, the kind that makes a man hesitate, makes him doubt the orders he's following. That hesitation cost them. Tasunki charged straight toward two men struggling to load water barrels onto a wagon. With one thrust of his spear, he knocked the first man off his feet, and with a swift follow-through, he sent the second tumbling backward with a scream. Eli wheeled left, spotting a teenage boy pinned beneath a fallen crate near the general store. Bullets ricocheted off the boardwalk beside him. Cigarette smoke curled from a bandit crouched behind a trough. Without thinking, Eli dove from his saddle, slammed into the bandit, knocked the revolver from his hand, and cracked his skull with the butt of his own. He hauled the boy upright and shoved him toward the church, yelling for him to stay low. All around them, the battle twisted through the town like wildfire. Horses rearing, outlaws scrambling for cover, Apache riders moving with sharp, unstoppable precision. Then Eli saw something that froze him where he stood. Alohi, the girl he'd tried to hide from all of this. She stood on the flatbed of his old ranch wagon, pale, shaky, wounded, but upright, holding the small revolver Eli had forgotten he left in the shed. Her dark braid fluttered in the rising heat as she shouted something in Apache, pointing directly at the outlaws clustered near the well. Tasunki heard her instantly. He spun his horse and charged toward them. Well, roaring her words like a command turned into fire. But another figure had heard her too. The outlaw leader in the long black coat, perched on the hotel roof, rifle braced, face as cold and empty as the desert sky. His barrel lined up with precision, not at the Apache, not at Ward, not at Eli, but at Alohi. Eli's breath died in his throat. Before thought could catch up to instinct, he sprinted across the street, boots skidding through blood and dust, and vaulted onto the wagon, slamming into Alohi with enough force to knock her flat as the gunshot cracked like thunder. Heat exploded across Eli's side. He didn't feel pain at first, just the shock of impact, then a spreading warmth that he knew wasn't good. Alohi gasped beneath him, her hands already pressing to the wound on his ribs, trying to stop the blood leaking through his shirt. "No, no, no, stay," she whispered desperately. Eli couldn't answer. Breath came short, shallow, thick. The outlaw leader reloaded with chilling calm, preparing to fire again, this time at Tasunki, who was too focused on the outlaws near the well to see the danger. Ward saw it, though. The sheriff fired, but the shot went wild, smashing the window beside the outlaw instead of hitting him. Then another crack shattered the air. The leader staggered backward. A hole bloomed across his chest. He swayed, eyes shocked wide, before tumbling from the roof and slamming into the dirt in a limp heap. Harris Clay stood halfway down the street, rifle still raised, panting like a man who'd finally discovered the difference between bravery and stupidity. For a moment, everything went still. Then the remaining outlaws saw their leader lying dead and realized they were cornered. Apache warriors closing from one side, townsfolk from the other. One by one, their rifles clattered to the ground. Hands lifted. Knees hit dirt. Surrender washed over them like a dust storm losing strength. The fighting ended as suddenly as it had begun. Eli lay on the wagon, vision flickering in and out, hearing voices swirl like distant echoes. Alohi calling for help. Tasunki barking orders. Ward yelling for the doctor. He remembered Anna's small hand curling around his finger, remembered promising she would never be alone, remembered feeling like a man hollowed out by grief. Now, faces hovered above him. Alohi, Ward, Tasunki, voices blending in a way he never imagined possible. When he woke again, he was inside the church, lying on a long table beneath a stained glass window, glowing warm with afternoon sun. The doctor had cleaned the bullet wound, stitched it, and wrapped his ribs tight. "You got lucky," Ward said quietly from a nearby bench. "Another inch, and you'd be talking to ghosts." Eli swallowed, throat dry. "Town?" Ward nodded. "Safe. Thanks to you. Thanks to them." Outside, a soft pattering sound filled the air. Eli frowned until he realized what it was. Rain, real rain, falling on Deadstone Ridge, for the first time in months. Through the open church door, he saw townsfolk stepping out into the street, faces turned upward, eyes closed, letting the sky wash them clean. Apache warriors stood beside them, not as enemies, not as strangers, but as tired souls sharing the same miracle. Alohi sat at his bedside, smiling faintly. "See?" she whispered. "You not alone." Tasunki entered the church with slow, respectful steps and placed a small medicine pouch on Eli's chest. "Debts," he said in halting English. "Paid and kept." Eli let out a breath he'd been holding for years. Outside, the rain kept falling. Soft, steady, forgiving, finally turning the dust of Deadstone Ridge into something that felt like hope. The rain that fell over Deadstone Ridge did not stop after an hour or even two. It kept coming in a soft but steady curtain, soaking into the thirsty earth, as if the sky had finally decided the town had suffered long enough, and Eli Mercer lay inside the church, listening to the rhythmic patter on the roof, with the uneasy feeling that life was shifting beneath his feet, changing direction like a river after a flash flood. By the time he was strong enough to sit upright without the world tilting, the doctor had left. The candles were burning low, and outside the windows he could hear the murmured conversations of townsfolk and Apache, voices blending in a way that would have been unthinkable just days before. Alohi sat near his feet, whittling a small piece of wood, something Tasunki had given her to keep her hands occupied. And every so often she glanced up at Eli with a look that held both affection and gratitude, the kind that made a man feel heavier and lighter at the same time. Sheriff Ward Kessler stepped into the church, shaking water from his hat, his face lined with the strange mixture of hope and exhaustion that comes when a man has survived a battle he never expected to walk away from. "Town's different today," Ward said, leaning against a pew. "People are talking, working together. Hell, a couple of kids even ran through the street laughing in the rain. Haven't seen that in years." Eli gave a small smile. Pain tugged at his ribs, but didn't stop him. "Maybe the desert finally decided not to kill us." Ward chuckled softly. "Or maybe saving each other taught us something we forgot." But the sheriff's expression shifted, turning more serious. "The outlaws we captured? They're trouble. Half of them got bounties from here to Arizona territory. The leader was wanted for murder, robbery, and whatever else a man with no soul does for money. We'll have to march them to Fort Quincy. Won't be an easy trip." Eli's jaw tightened. "You're thinking of asking Tasunki?" Ward nodded. "They're his enemies now, too. And he's got riders who know this land better than we do." As if summoned, Tasunki himself entered the church, his presence filling the room with a quiet gravity that made even Ward straighten. The Apache chief walked to Eli's bedside and studied him for a long moment before placing a hand on his shoulder, firm and steady. He spoke softly, and Alohi translated. "He says you are not weak. You fight like someone who has lost much but stands anyway." Eli swallowed hard, unsure how to answer such a thing. Tasunki continued, gesturing toward the door where rain dripped along the frame. Alohi translated again. "He says the storm brought change, but change is not safe. He wants to talk about what comes next." Ward and Eli exchanged uneasy glances as they followed Tasunki outside into the cool, wet air. The town was almost unrecognizable. Children splashing in puddles, Apache riders sharing blankets with settlers around small campfires, women hauling buckets to catch rainwater, laughter mixing with the crackle of damp wood. It looked fragile, like a miracle that could vanish if someone breathed too hard. Under the awning of the saloon, Tasunki stood with Ward and Eli, while Alohi translated his words with careful precision. "The outlaws will send others," she said, repeating her father's message. "Brothers, cousins, men who followed their leader with fear or loyalty. They will come to reclaim what was taken, including the bodies. They will not forgive defeat. Ward cursed under his breath. So we're not done. Eli felt cold settle in his stomach. How many? Alohi shrugged sadly. Maybe 20. Maybe more. Tasunki stepped closer to Eli and placed 2 fingers on Eli's chest where his wound was, gently, respectfully. He spoke again. Alohi's voice softened as she translated. He says you protected his daughter. You spilled blood for her. He spilled blood for your town. Now he says we must choose, stand apart and die alone, or stand together and make the outlaws fear ever stepping foot here again. The word struck Eli with a force stronger than any bullet. For a moment, the 3 men, rancher, chief, sheriff, stood in the rain, feeling the weight of a future none of them had expected to face together. Ward finally exhaled. If we fight as one, he said quietly. Tasunki nodded. Eli felt a spark ignite inside him, not hope exactly, but something close. The next few days moved fast. Apache riders patrolled the perimeter, while the townsfolk repaired their wells, reinforced buildings, and redistributed supplies now that the rain had gifted them a chance at survival. Harris Clay, humbled by the battle, apologized to Eli in a stiff, awkward way before helping rebuild the wagon he'd shot holes into years earlier. Even Fletcher, the jittery mayor, seemed steadier now that water wasn't something measured in spoonfuls. Eli spent most of his time recovering in the church or sitting outside beneath the patched awning while Alohi taught local children simple Apache words, and Ward worked with Tasunka to plan defenses. But the real turning point came one evening when the rain finally stopped and the sky stretched clear and bright over Deadstone Ridge. Eli walked, slowly, painfully, to the well, leaning on a cane Marla Tyson insisted he take. There he found Tasunki standing alone, looking into the water with a contemplative silence. Eli cleared his throat. "What are you thinking?" Tasunki didn't speak at first. When he finally did, Alohi stepped forward to translate. He says this land remembers every drop of blood spilled on it. Tonight, for the first time in many seasons, it will remember rain instead. Eli felt his throat tighten. I lost my family before the drought. It made me forget who I was. But giving Alohi water, maybe it brought some of that back. Alohi smiled softly. Tasunki placed a firm hand on Eli's back and spoke again. He says the desert takes much, but sometimes it gives back what matters most, if a man is brave enough to do what is right. That night, under a sky full of stars and wet sand cooling beneath their boots, Apache and settlers shared food, stories, and a cautious, budding trust. Eli sat beside Alohi and Tasunki near the fire, feeling something he hadn't felt in years, a sense that the world hadn't ended with his family's passing, that somehow, through blood and fire and mercy, a new chapter had found him. And Deadstone Ridge, once a place dying under the sun, now breathed again, alive, united, ready for whatever storm came next.